Welcome to Virginia Cares online survival training course. My name is Ted Edlich. I am the chairman of the board of Virginia Cares, the Community Action Reentry System, which was developed at the end of 1978 by Total Action Against Poverty, now Total Action for Progress, to help in the reentry of folks who were coming out of state institutions and helping them to successfully gain traction in a positive way in their life so they did not go back to prison, but had a very meaningful, beneficial life that made a positive impact on their friends, their neighbors, their family, and their community. Before Virginia Cares was created, essentially inmates were given $25 and a suit of clothes, work clothes, and sent home and said, make it on your own. Since Virginia Cares, we've had both pre- and post-incarceration services with the help of finding a job, to adjusting to family, and to being able to keep body and soul together for the first period of time so that you could make get a grip on life and have greater success. I mean, Virginia Cares programs, the participants have been studied in terms of recidivists, and whereas there's a 43% recidivist rate for the nation, 43% of those getting out of prison go back to prison, and about a 27% rate in Virginia over 3 years. Virginia Cares participants boast only a 7% return rate. That means only out of 100 people coming out of prison, only 7 return, which is fairly dramatic. So this is another aid, in addition to your local Virginia Cares program, to assist you in making this transition. As I was preparing for this survival course, video survival course for those coming out of prison, I was thinking about a program that I recently saw on Netflix called Out of the Wild. Out of the Wild was a reality show in which they took 9 folks, volunteers, from different walks of life and plopped them down out in the wilderness in northern Venezuela and told to make their way through high cliffs and mountain ranges and jungle and savannas with lions and tigers and rivers with crocodiles, make their way 23 miles by themselves, living off the land. They were given enough food for a couple of meals, but from then on they had to find their food wherever they could. And so they were given a 3-day survival training program that helped them to get knowledge of where they might find food, even by the hardest, and how to get their way through these various obstacles of nature to the end 23 miles away. 9 people started out and 5 made it because they were able to apply what they had learned in this survival training program. I was also thinking about a study that we did when we first started working in Virginia Cares. I myself, along with Lynn Atkins Edlich, who really was the designer of Virginia Cares and helped to launch the first pre- and post-incarceration program in the Commonwealth, Virginia. She and I worked for over 10 years doing self-awareness programs in the local jails, but principally in the Troutville Camp 24. So I had a good understanding of what life in prison, even for somebody on the outside, was like for those who were inside. And when I was thinking about the difference between being in prison and being on the outside, I was explaining this to a good friend who helped us develop Virginia Cares, called Tom Kaufman, who was a social psychologist at Roanoke College. And I said, you know, Tom, it's like culture shock. I mean, here in prison, all the decisions are made for you, principally. That is, you're told when to eat, what to wear, where to go, when to go to bed, when to get up. Everything's made for you. What to wear, the whole deal. How to act. But when you get out in the real world, outside of prison, although being in prison is also part of the real world, but when you get out on the outside, life is totally different, because there you've got to figure out how you're going to eat, where you're going to live, who are the people you're going to associate with, because even if you weren't really crazy about the people in prison, you know, at least they were there. But then you go on the outside and you may find yourself alone, devoid even of bad company. So the question about making friends, contacting, dealing with people, finding a job, all these many decisions that you're suddenly thrust upon you are decisions you didn't have to make while you were in prison. And I said, Tom, it's like culture shock. And Tom then went and began to research, as a good researcher he was, the whole issue of culture shock. And there were actually some very good studies, principally studies that were done with the Peace Corps population who volunteered to leave the United States, go to another country, and to give assistance for 2 or 3 years to the population, be it in Africa or South America, Asia, or somewhere else. And what he found was that there was a U-shaped curve. We call it the culture shock U-shaped curve. And when people were signing up to go to another country, they had very high expectations. I mean, it was thrilling, because this was a chance in a lifetime to travel. It was a time to meet people of a different part of the world. It was a part of an opportunity to render assistance to help improve and change their lives. In some cases, it was the ability to learn a different language. It was the ability to travel, to see the world on a different scale from just reading about it or seeing videos about it. So what happened is they had very high expectations about what it was going to be like. They had in their minds that they knew the country they were going to, they actually knew the area, they knew the kind of work they were going to be doing. They anticipated that the people there really wanted them. And so they had these high expectations. But then when they got to the country, there were a lot of changes. Sometimes they were sent to a different section of the country, sometimes a different continent. They might have learned some introductory words of the language, but the area they were going to had a different language. They were familiar with the roads, the terrain, the climate. And when they got there, they found, instead of being there with another Peace Corps person who was going to be part of their support system, they were alone. And so very soon, these high expectations started to fade. They had disappointments. Life was not how they had envisioned it to be. In fact, it was very different. They had adjustments that they had to make. They had to find new friends. They had to learn new skills. They had to deal with people who may not have been as excited about their coming as they were told by the Peace Corps trainers. And over a period of time, they had a great deal of anxiety, because when you're in a lot of newness, you're just unsure of yourself. There's a lot of self-judgment that goes on. Maybe I'm not really up to it. And as it proceeded, they also lost energy. They experienced fatigue, tiredness, physically and even mentally. Their minds ceased to be as sharp as they were back home. And over a period of time, all of these pressures for adjustment left them with a sense of feeling very low mood, very down, and even depression. And this is the point at which people bailed. This is the point in the Out of the Wild project. People pressed a a button on a GPS, and a helicopter came in, plucked them out, and took them to safety. This is the time when people left the Peace Corps and went home. But what was interesting about the U-shaped curve is that if they stuck it out with determination and some optimism and a willingness to believe that it was going to work out if they just stayed the course, then the cycle began to turn up, and they began to feel better because they met people that they actually liked. They found other people that could help them. They found that, yes, maybe they were there to at first dig and build roads in a country, and now the issue of helping to find water and digging wells was the issue, that they could learn something and can be as effective in the new job as they were in the old. And they found that the more they related to the people there, other Peace Corps workers who might be in the area, as well as the people in the community, that they began to feel support. However, one of the things that was found out is that if people toughed it out, if they made the adjustments, if they took some time, then they began to make friends. They began to learn the new skills. So if they were trained to help build roads, but really what they had to do was help build wells for water in this new location, that they could do that just as well. They began to develop relationships with the local people, and they began to create a support system there. And slowly but surely, they began to feel better about themselves. Their minds operated a little more quickly. They were able to feel physically good about themselves. And by the end of the period, their whole mood and sense of accomplishment had reached a very, very high degree. Now, one of the things you want to bear in mind is it generally took 2 years for this transition shock cycle, this U-shaped curve, to rebound to the point of good feeling about themselves, good feeling about what they've done, and a sense of accomplishment and a sense of good respect for their own self-worth. It's a 2-year period. So when you were looking at the questionnaire that I had introduced at the beginning of this segment, and you answer the question, how long do you expect the transition from prison to the outside world will take? If you put 3 to 5 months, you are essentially sabotaging your own recovery. If you put 9 to 11 months, you got a better chance. If you put 12 months or more, even better. Because what happens is if you've got a time frame in your mind of being 3 to 6 months and you're still down here and not up here, you're going to feel bad about yourself. When the fact is, this is a normal transition. If you go through a divorce, it takes 2 years. If you go through the death of a child, it takes 2 years. If you go through a transfer, lost a job, find another, it takes 2 years to make that transition. So this is a normal thing, and so why set up an expectation that is just going to make you feel like a failure and sabotage your own survival? So the first thing is to understand that in the survival course, that this is going to take you 2 years. Another way of seeing why that downturn of the U-shaped curve is experienced by people who are in a transition like coming out of prison is Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Maslow was a psychologist who began to look at what are basic human needs that are true of everybody who are in the wide range of being normal. Well, and even those who have serious emotional mental problems. there are five levels. One is survival needs. That is, we've got to be able to access food. We've got to be able to access shelter. We've got to have some basic transportation. We've got to have clothes. We've got to have those things that help us to live one day to the next. And then there are a whole level of security needs. That is, I need to have some assurance that this is, I'm going to be able to eat today, but maybe to be able to eat this month, or that I have a roof over my head, not just today, but for the next 6 months. And these are the security needs. Then belonging needs. Everybody has a need to have a connection with other people. And that's why solitary confinement is such a devastating punishment, because it disconnects us from other human beings. And we always need the company and the support and the positive relationship with other human beings. And I know, having been cooped up now for any period of time, maybe as much as 5 or 10 years, with a group of people in a closed, cramped situation, you may think that the best thing in the world is to be alone. But the fact is that every one of us needs some kind of positive connection with other people. And so coming out of prison, you're not only dealing with survival and security, but also belonging needs. Who are going to be the folks that you associate with? And many times we're a reflection of our own association. There's other issue is control. Have some sense of control over your life. And coming out of prison with very little resources, that's something that has to be built up over time. And the last is creativity, that when you have these needs met, the idea of having a positive impact, a creative impact on the world around you is a basic need we all have. And the point is that coming out of prison, you are struggling to meet all of these needs. And just doing so is a very daunting task that is going to make life difficult at best in the first certainly 6 months, but maybe up to a 2-year period. Again, another approach to this U-shaped curve is the whole theory of stress. And there's a fellow by the name of Hans Selye some 20 years ago that really did a very exciting analysis of stress and how stress not only affects the mind, but it affects the body. It affects the whole neurological system and the kind of hormones that are pumped out when you're under stress into the rest of the system, usually adrenal and cortisol. And these can help to boost the system, kind of put you on alert, but over time begin to wear and tear at your physical makeup and actually help to destroy the body. He said a few things about it. One is that we all have a well of adaptation energy. That is, when we are having to make adjustments, we can go into a well of energy that helps us to make those adjustments. And he quoted the story of some mice. They decided they were going to stress some mice in a cage. And so they decided to turn the temperature of the cage down significantly, 10, 20 degrees, to see what happened to the mice. And what happened was, at first, they shivered. They ran around the cage more frequently, and they were very hyperactive. They also ate a lot, and as they did this, they began to adapt, and the hair on their bodies began to grow, so they had a warmer coat. And so at some point, they began to look just like they did when they were operating under much warmer climate. And so Selye wondered about these mice. Can you just go on adapting and adapting and adapting? Well, what happened was they did adapt, but then they died early. because the stress of reacting to that temperature change actually took its toll. At some point, we have a well of adaptation energy, but if it's not inexhaustible, and so as we keep drawing up that energy to make those adjustments, it can take a lot of tear on our body. That's why people in the U-shaped curve began to feel slow in their mind, slow in their physical movements, slow in their ability to respond, because they were using up that adaptation energy. The third thing he said is the greatest stressor in life is failure. That is the greatest, and you can identify with that. Think about the times that you felt like you were a failure. It is the greatest wear and tear on you. And the last thing he said was that the greatest counter to stress is earning the greatest amount of gratitude from the greatest number of people. In other words, earning the gratitude of others. The more people feel grateful to you for what you've done in their lives, help to give you the kind of support to get you through very stressed situations. And I know there are people who've abandoned you, but there are people who've stuck with you to express your gratitude to them, and then everybody you meet on the outside, even an employer who's not going to hire you, but at least gives you an interview, a note to him or her saying how grateful you are that they gave you a chance. So what I want to present to you is the Virginia Cares 4-point transition program. And there are really 4 steps. The first is don't increase the stress. You're already going to be under enough stress, so you don't have to go out of your way to increase it. The second is build a positive support system. The third is change the way you think. And the fourth is change what you do. So let's look at don't increase the stress. The first one is use of alcohol and drugs. Now, I want to tell you something that may not be very popular, because if you've been in prison for a long time and you haven't had a beer, or you haven't had a drink, or you haven't had any marijuana, even low-level drugs like that, there's a great temptation to do it because, after all, it's been forbidden for the years you served time. But I will tell you from my experience, working both with inmates in jail and outside, that if a inmate returning to society makes a pledge not to use any alcohol or drugs, they stand a 70% chance, if not 100% chance, of making it successfully in the transition over 2 years. A couple of reasons that are fairly obvious. One is that drugs and alcohol take a toll on the system. They don't help the system. The second is that they interfere with good problem-solving mental activity. That is, they dull the intellect, they dull the logical mind, and they allow emotions to run rampant, which if you weren't drinking, you'd have some control over. So what happens is you make bad judgments, and also you allow feelings, whether it be lust or anger or depression or whatever it is, to get a hold of you and drag you in a direction that is not the kind of direction that's going to help you in your transition. So this is an area that I would say you need to take it seriously. Think about it. This is not, I'm not moralizing. I'm not saying that drinking is something that should never be done. What I'm saying is you're coming out of prison and you got all the stress on you. What you don't need is to add the stress of both alcohol and drugs. And from the standpoint of employment, if you're using marijuana, it takes certainly several months to get out of your system. And most employers now drug test. You're just not going to get the job. The second one is, and I will say, I have people I've known well who have come out of prison. They've been through a drug treatment program that actually had a great impact on their lives, very positive impact. And within 3 months, they had a DUI. So now, on top of all the charges, all the costs they've had before, now they've got to go to court again. They've got to deal with a probation officer. They may have their license taken from them, and they've certainly got the fines of having to deal with the DUI. The second one is avoid high-cost relationships. After you're in prison, it is very normal that you want to come out and have a relationship with another human being, either of the opposite sex or sometimes of the same sex, depending on what your orientation is. And so that there is a need, or at least a want, that you want to satisfy about having sexual contact. But the only problem is that sometimes sexual contact has a cost. I know a young man who recently, within the last 2 years, gets out of prison. He's already got a child by a former wife. He gets involved with a young lady, and it's a great relationship. She's pregnant within a month. Now he has another child. He's only got a minimum wage job. And, you know, as he got to know her, he realized, wow, you know, she got a lot of problems, which now, because she's the mother of his new child, are his problems as well. So you have to be really cautious about getting yourself in high-cost relationships. You want to have relationships that have a dividend, a positive dividend, and not additional costs that's loading stress on you in already a stressful environment. The third is financial debt. You come out of prison, you've already got court costs, you've got fines, you may have child support payments. The tendency is to want to get those things, those material things that you couldn't have while you were in prison. And so the people are often willing to start shelling out dollars to get credit, to borrow money, and driving them in a more difficult predicament. One of the things when you get out of prison and you try to get an apartment, they look at your credit. So if you are putting yourselves in worse and worse credit situation, just getting a roof over your head in a decent apartment complex in a decent area of the city becomes more foreboding. So first, don't increase your stress. The second is to build a positive support system. In some cases, in most cases, there are some family members who are going to give you a break in the relationship, who are going to be supportive if they see you working in a positive direction. So the first thing is to find those people in the family who if you start communicating with them, will be a positive support system. If you do ask them for any kind of financial assistance, make sure that you pay them back. In other words, you want to express your gratitude to them for sticking with you and talk to them about realistically, honestly, what's going on with you and let them know how much you appreciate them, and don't take advantage of them, because that'll just spoil some of the positives for a support system. You maybe have friends out there in the community, and you'll have associates that you were involved in when you got involved with criminal acts. But you may have other friends there who are people who are going to be supportive of you. So you want to be able to connect with them. And you want to begin to establish new contacts, new relationships wherever you can. So building a support community with family and new friends and old friends. The second is interaction skills. And one of the questions related to the issue of interaction skills. There was a fellow by the name of William Glasser who wrote a very, very good book on interaction skills. He said that all of us have various needs, and we pointed out Maslow's hierarchy, and we depend upon other people helping us to meet those needs. So what we need to do is build up the best positive relationships we can with those people. And he said there are two types of approaches. One, what he calls the control behaviors, and the other is caring behaviors. And he said that most of us, when it comes to relationships, we rely on what he calls the 7 deadly traits, the 7 toxic traits of interacting. That is, we criticize, we complain, we blame, we bribe, we nag, we punish, we threaten other people. And you can also begin to think in your life of others who have not had a very positive relationship with you, maybe often families, who use those kind of behaviors to interact with you. And he said what those do is they drive people away. And then he said there are 7 caring traits. And these are in blue: supporting, encouraging, listening, accepting, trusting, respecting, negotiating differences. And what he advises people to do is, if you want to get the most out of life, abandon those negative, unhelpful control behaviors and caring, supportive behaviors. One thing, and that may not be as easy because so many of us have been trained so well in the criticizing, the complaining, the blaming, the bribing, the nagging behaviors. And so many people tend to have a negative approach that we have to really catch ourselves to begin to develop these behaviors, even if we don't feel like it. In other words, when you're angry or you're frustrated, you may not feel like being supportive. Well, just act as if, and act supporting, act accepting, listen, and do the other things. The last thing on building a support system is I strongly advise everybody to find a spiritual community, a community of hope, a community of acceptance, a community of forgiveness, a community of patience. Now, it may be a spiritual community that sometime in your life you've already been identified with. It may be a new spiritual community that you were engaged in as a result of your incarceration or have been thinking about exploring. It may be a spiritual community like NA or AA. But find a spiritual community, and it's going to take some effort on your part to find a place where you fit. But I know for a fact, from my own life and the lives of others, that all of us need a community, a spiritual community of hope, of support, of acceptance, and encouragement. And so what I'd encourage you to do, if you haven't got one, is to go and begin exploring. If you go someplace, doesn't turn out to be what you want, go explore another one. But not give up until you found your own spiritual community of hope. Well, this is number 3. Change how you think. There was a fellow by the name of Albert Ellis who was a psychologist. And he essentially said that it's not, we don't lead our lives on the basis of just what we get rewarded or what we don't get rewarded for, but our thoughts rather than events change our lives. And he developed what he had the ABC theory. A was the event, and many times an adverse event, therefore an A, and C was the consequence. So you get hit in the back of your car by another car, and that's the adverse event, and the consequence is how you're going to feel and how you're going to react. So if your thinking is, my God, this is the worst thing that's going to happen to me, and now look what I won't be able to get from there to there, I might get charged for stopping too quickly, I may have to go to court, that's going to cost me things. Then when you get to the consequence, you're going to be angry, uptight, and lashing out, right? However, if after you get hit you think, wow, this is terrible, but it's not the worst thing that could have happened. I mean, I could have been hit by a car coming at me and killed. This probably is going to get repaired since the person hit me in the back. They're probably going to have to pay for it. Then how you're going to deal is a lot different. It's not something you wanted, but at least you're going to be able to act like an adult, call the cop, ask for their insurance and their license, so you have the information to go to their insurance company. So how we think determines how we're going to act. And many of us are controlled by thoughts of how life ought to be, how others ought to treat us, how life ought to turn out, what we ought to be able to experience and get out of life, how we ought to be. And what happens is that when we're filled with all these oughts about life, then we're filled when life doesn't measure up, and it usually doesn't, with anger towards ourselves, other people, and life in general. And we're more likely to bail at that bottom time of the U-curve because we are so uptight about how life ought to be. The truth is, life is what it is. It may not always be helpful, but it is what it is. The second is a locus of control. And one of the questions there dealt with, where do you see the locus of control over your life? The more we put the locus of control outside of ourselves, that it's the way others treat me, it's the way those hiring behave in terms of giving me a job or not. It's the control of my life is in the hands of other people. The least likely we're going to be able to get on the upside of that U-curve because we're going to be filled with criticism, filled with blame, filled with those 7 deadly behaviors and interaction types. The more we put the responsibility for our own destiny in our own hands and take responsibility for it, then we're going to have at least the drive and the energy to do something about it. The third thing is, and you'll understand this, but it may be something you hadn't thought about. The only time you really are alive is now in the present moment. The only time you're alive is now in the present moment. The past is gone. The future is not here. And so often, instead of being in the present moment, taking one day at a time, one moment at a time, living out the miracle of just being alive, we're consumed with what happened to us in the past, or what we've done to others in the past, or we're consumed by our anticipation of what's going to happen in the future, and especially what we're afraid is going to happen in the future. So between our obsession with the past and the future, we shut out the only time in which we are really alive, which is the present moment. The fourth thing is studies have been shown in terms of people who feel good about themselves, who are happy with their lives, and more often than not, they're the very same people who are grateful to others, who express their gratitude to other people. And the more we examine what we are grateful for and express that gratitude to other people, in turn, the more happier we'll be, the less stress we'll be, the more we will communicate a sense of positiveness to other people, and the more relationships we'll be able to build. And that's a very good part of that whole business of being supportive, accepting of others, which is one of the 7 positive caring skills. And the last is to change what we do. And there are 5 things I want to mention here. The first is we got to learn how, and this has to do with the present moment, to stop. The S stands for stop, that is actually stop whatever we're doing. Take a few minutes. The T stands for take a breath. Take 3 breaths. Observe what is going on within us, how we're feeling in our body. Doing a quick body scan. Observing how we're feeling and where those feelings are in our body. Examining from a third-person perspective what thoughts are going through my minds. Not as if they're our thoughts, but we're an observer as if they're somebody else's thoughts. And only after we've stopped for 5-10 minutes, then do we want to proceed. So whenever we're in, and this could happen in a positive setting, but especially in a negative setting, just stopping and taking a breath, observing before proceeding. It's just like our grandmothers used to tell us, before you do something, count to 10. Only this is a little more structured in terms of what you do, in terms of taking your breath, observing, and then before proceeding. The second thing is take a job rather than no job. It's always easier to get employed if you got a job. But when you take a job, however it's beneath your capability, do it with the standard of excellence. Do it as if that job is the most important job in the world. Outperform your own expectations. Get into your head that you want to become indispensable to the organization who's employed you, or the employer. So that if there are things to do beyond what you're doing because you've done it in such a good way and you've done it in a faster time. Look for other things that you can help with. Make excellence your standard. The third thing is find a positive addiction. William Glasser, who wrote the book Choice Theory that I just talked about, also wrote a book called Positive Addictions. And he noted how there are certain activities that will help you feel better. And because it actually changes the firing of certain chemicals in your brain, usually dopamine, epinephrine, and some others. And one of them is running. You've heard of the runner's high, so that after a person has run a certain number of miles, they begin to feel better. I used to get a swimmer's high. He also lists meditation or yoga as a way done for at least 20 minutes. You begin to release those positive pheromones. I would also say working out of the gym. When I work out of the gym and I get a couple of hours in, my brain feels better. I feel better. So find a positive addiction. You have to kind of build up to it, but after a while, at first it's kind of work, just like working out physically. But after a while, you begin to miss it if you're not doing it. But this is a way to help turn yourself on and to reduce the amount of stress so you make it through that U-shaped curve. The next to last thing is do something to help someone else. A recent study was shown that people who volunteer to work with some organization that's helping other people have if they don't have a high school degree, they have a 51% better chance of getting a job. Even if they have a high school degree, they have a 27% chance of getting a job. And why do you think that is? Well, I think it is of two reasons. One is you feel good about doing something for somebody else. I know there were a group of men who were laid off from their job, and they found that spending 8 to 10 hours a day just applying for jobs was very wearing. So when they banded together and they decided that half a day they would volunteer to help somebody else, to help mow a lawn or paint a porch or do something to help a neighbor. And it made them feel so good that when they presented themselves in interviews, they felt good about who they were. The second is in volunteer jobs, you meet other people, and those people may be the very people who are going to connect you with an opportunity. It's usually, the studies show, not those people who are your closest contacts, but your lowest level contacts that are responsible for giving you the leads to future employment. And the last thing is smile. I know this may come as difficult, but the truth is, the studies have been done, is that people who smile are likely to have better connection with other people. And they're likely to feel better about themselves. And there's some physiological reasons for this. The nerves of the face, and I say if you smile not just with your lips but also with your eyes, are connected to the heart. And the very act of smiling essentially calms the heart, and it calms the system that is pumping those cortisol and adrenaline and other drugs that are trying to keep your whole body revved up. It reduces those into your system. It also is a way to connect with people. People always like people who smile. And it takes some practice. You may not be a smiler. And in prison, it may not be the best thing to be smiling all the time. Although I think, actually, it can change relationships even there. But get into the habit of smiling. You can smile and add to that by every person you meet. In your mind, I wish them that they are happy. I wish happiness for them. So anyhow, smile. Now, the last thing I want to say is, above all, the most important thing, beyond what we've talked about, in making this successful transition is grit and determination. Hunkering down and just making it through the bad times. I'm reminded of a book written by a former Navy SEAL who was wounded in Mogadishu, and he was talking about his SEAL training, which is very grueling. Tremendous workouts in the water, on land, staying up 16 hours a day or more over a many-week period of time. And at any time during the SEAL training, someone could come up, if they just had it, they were ready to bail, and they'd ring the bell, and they'd be eliminated from the program. And he said that there were many people there who were in much better physical condition. They'd been great athletes. They had greater strength, and they rang the bell, and he didn't. And one of the things he said was he had a stepfather who had been a pretty punishing, exacting stepfather. He said, you know, life was so tough growing up, there was nothing they could do to me that was tougher than what I'd already experienced. And so he hunkered down and had the grit and the determination to make it through, which you're going to have in making it through these 2 years. In looking at people who succeed, the element of grit, determination, is the most significant trait in people who succeed in life. So, welcome to the Virginia Cares Survival course. This is the first of 10 sessions. There will be other courses in seeking employment, financial management, housing, family and children, managing thoughts and feeling, education, managing relationships, healthcare, and contributing to the well-being of others. Now, I just want you to think about a few things. Think about 5 things you've learned about the reentry process, the transition that'll help you going forward. List 3 diversions that will make the process harder. List 3 ways of keeping your spirits up so you don't give up. List 2 goals of what you want to achieve next month. List 2 goals of what you want to achieve in the next week. List what you're going to do when you leave this meeting to get on your way in this survival course. Thank you very much.